Hello and welcome to the 8th part of this series of top-down programming logic. My name is David Thorne. I'm from Thorne Web Design. Now obviously we're using PHP. If you haven't seen the previous 7 videos, please watch them. I said it every single video, but please watch the other 7 videos, or watch this one and just watch it. Okay, so we've kind of been over what we've done. We've created a user object interface so far. Next task is to create the user object model, and so on. I've updated the file very slightly just by giving some descriptions of what get name, set name, get surname, and set surname, get username, and so on, what they do. Just to add a little bit of information here, returns, like get name for example, returns the private object name property, so we know that in the object it needs to have a private property of name, and this can be set by using the set name object method. Okay, very simple. Obviously if with inside of the object it can just be set as as a property anyway, so but from outside of the objects it needs to use the methods. You can't access those object properties from outside of the object, as in an instantiated object itself. Okay, so a couple of things. Obviously, the main thing that we're looking at right now is this. This is the top down here. This is what we care about. In building, we know that we've got a login instance. We check whether the user's active. If they're not active, then we set all of the relevant details, and then we check that it's all been executed, and then the user has no errors, and if it's got errors then it goes here, otherwise it's here. Now potentially at this point we want user equals something. We want a user object. So because we're doing top down, we're going to go back to here, and that's what we're going to design this bit here, so then we can then do the rest of the code, so ultimately we get a user. So because we don't want to cross objects, we want to know that the user object doesn't potentially access the login object, or the login object doesn't touch the user object. We don't want the two touching each other. We want an intermediate class that does all this for us. So that's what the factory is essentially for. So we want a way of knowing that login does its job, tells factory what it is, who the user is, and then we get the user through the factory. Okay, so we get user object through the factory. We don't want the two touching each other. As far as we're concerned, the user object has no idea that the login object is there, and the login object has no idea that the user object is there whatsoever. Okay, so it means if we change the login object, it doesn't affect the user object. It's because it all comes through the factory. Alright, so as a good example, if you've never used this type of idea before, is that if in a car company, you know, the guy who makes the engine, he doesn't, if he changes something, he wants to know that it doesn't affect the person who makes the wheels. You know, he does something and he tells the main engineering team, I've changed this, I've made the car a little bit faster. Okay, so it might be a good idea that you have maybe better tyres or better wheels or better brakes or something like that. So then the main engineering team then in the factory then tells the other people, oh, by the way, the car's a little bit faster now, so we need bigger and better wheels. Ultimately, when the guy who puts the car together, he doesn't care, he just gets told put engine here and put there and so on. So within inside of the factory as such, the factory just needs to know they take the different items from the different people and put it all together. So the factory itself doesn't care how the things got made. It's just saying, hey, give me engine, give me wheel, give me this, and I'll put it all together. Alright, so that's essentially what it is. And this here is the end product. Okay, the factory is helping us build the end products, essentially. Okay, so we need factory and we're going to say get active user, okay, because we want a method of getting a user, but this is get active user, as in the logged in user and not just a user. Alright, so that's what we need to have. We need to have a get active user with inside of the factory. So I deem this one's a pretty important one. So we're going to say public static function get active user, doesn't take any parameters or arguments, sorry, and we'll give it a description, and it's going to return a user object. Okay, returns the active logged in user. A cookie must be set for this to return an active user object. Let's just put that together. So this is essentially going to return null if it's not a user object. So we're at another point now where we need another folder, because we need actual objects. So we're going to make a new folder, and we're going to say objects, and we're going to put in here user objects PHP, and we're going to call this then class, obviously, and user objects, and this is going to implement user interface. Alright, now we're going to ignore this for now because we don't care about it, and so this is going to return we need to do some testing about is the user logged in, this, that and the other. Return new okay, we need to say user first of all, because potentially what we need to be able to do is we don't always want to be able to access the database, we just want to have it stored within inside of the factory. So we're going to say private static, and we're going to say active user object equals null. Alright, so this is by default null, and so essentially once we've set it, we can say self active user object equals new user object, and this is where we would then use the load method, okay, that we've got, because we would need to obtain it from the cookie and so on. Now if this is where it kind of comes back to the login side of it, because what we do know is, let's say that this is the first time the users come to this page with a username and password. Okay, so it comes here, and we know that the cookie has been set. With inside of the execute, it checks, it then sets the cookie, and it continues on. All right. Now, with inside of execute, we need to tell factory what the user is. Okay, so essentially what we need here is another method for them to set it. Okay, we're going to say set active user, and this is going to be then user ID. Alright, and we're going to say active user ID equals null up here. So this is what we need. We need to know that the login executes calls this one method, so we can get a user ID, which means get active user essentially can then return an active user object. Okay, this is the kind of the interface between the two object classes. Okay, so they can both communicate. We don't want them communicating with one another. Now, if you know other programming languages, then essentially one could be on one thread and one could be on the other thread, and you can't have inter-thread communication. Therefore, you have to have another way of them being able to communicate with each other. Okay, but that's not PHP. So this is what we need to do. We're not going to load the user here. We're just going to say self active user ID equals user ID, and so this needs to be int set user. We want to know, right? We want to know that the login user, the login object doesn't know that there is a user object there. Okay, it's just extracted the information from the database, had it as a standard class, okay, and it set that with inside of the login, and all its job is to do is to know the username, the password, and the user ID, and it update last login, and that's it. And at one point we need a method of being able to then get the with inside of that to get the user ID and then set it with the factory. Okay, that's what its task is. So set active user, sets the user ID so as the active user object can be created. This call should be made from the login method at the initial point of entry of the application itself. Okay, so we're saying that this only needs to be called once on the entry point of the application. Okay, once the active user is set, then jobs are good. Okay, it's not going to return anything. It's just going to return void. So nothing's going to be returned as such, and it's just going to be set. So we need to come back to our login object, which is here. So we had executes, okay, which is somewhere down here. Execute is actually where it happened, and if login get user, so we've got it there. Okay, that was our own little login model get user. Okay, this not set cookie, return false. Okay, so we know now that we can say set user. Okay, so we've got user and then user ID, right? And that's essentially it. And we'll do one final check that there is actually a user ID, because this is kind of really important that we've got that user ID. If not, user ID, or we're going to be really explicit. If user ID is equal to null, then we're going to throw an exception, because this is important enough to throw an exception. A user ID could not has not been loaded within the login object. That's essentially it. I mean, we could add like lines and all sorts of stuff on that, but if we need to finish here and an exception has got thrown, now they could have they could catch it, but we're going to put this in anyway, and we're going to put it in here just for the sake of seeing that we've got errors here. Alright, we know that the user's been set here. Okay, and that's now our job done with inside of login. So we know that come login, we've got the user. Okay, and then the final check here, if user is instance of user object. Okay, that's what we want to check. Then, whoops, why did that do that? Then we can check from here. Otherwise, we're kind of we kind of got to have had an exception thrown already on here. Now we could catch that one exception here. So this is a kind of pretty key point here, where we'd want to catch that exception, and then we'll move this into here. Okay, because if it has gone wrong, then it's going to catch it here. Okay, and we essentially don't want to continue, so we only want to continue if it's within inside of this spot anyway. Okay, and we'll just say get message. That'll be it. Alright, so our application has properly failed if it gets to here. If it gets to here, then we know it's all okay. Alright, the user has been logged in. Alright, so we've now accomplished this bit. We know we have an active user object. Alright, so we come back to the factory, and we don't want to reinstantiate this user object if it's there already. Okay, so we're just going to say if self active user object is equal to null, we can just say is not equal to null, return self. Okay, and then finally return self, and you might be screaming in the background saying, but we haven't loaded it yet. Okay, now our user object in our interface is going to have it here, and loads user information from the database using the user ID as an identifier, returns true if user is loaded and false if not. Okay, so we know that here that we need self user ID here, and if is equal to null, once again we're going to throw we're not going to throw an exception, we're just going to return false. Okay, as simple as that. So we know that we've got that, and then we return the active user object. Job's done. Alright, so that's that bit completed. We can come back to here, and we know now that this should work, and if we just well, we can implement this now. Let's come down here, copy all this, copy this, copy that. It's a waste of time. Do this, do this. Sometimes I just find doing the menial stuff first is quicker. Okay, that's done. Load user ID. So now, because it's a user object, we need to know that we're going to go through and get all these things. So it needs to have a private user ID. Now, it's always key now to always use the same property names throughout. Okay, that's why we're defining it within inside of here. Okay, get object name. So user ID equals null. Okay, and this is going to set this user ID equals user ID. I'm going to set it straight away, and get user. So here we can test if user ID is equal to null. Sorry, it's not equal to null. this user ID equals user ID, and that then essentially needs if this load this user ID, okay, because we've got to call the load, but essentially if it's not equal to null, then we're setting it here. So now if this user ID is equal to null, now we're checking whether the actual main object user ID is null, then we just return false. You know, it's no point because we don't have a user ID, so therefore we can't get the user and we can't load it. So if we have got to this one point, then we know we can load it, okay, and if not load, then we're going to return false once again, so we know that we've got it. Now the load method, that's what needs to go to this needs a user model to load the object's data. Okay, so this essentially must have data first of all. So we're just going to say load in the beginning to do it. Get user and load, else return this. I like doing this because it means that when you do get user and you return this, it means that yes, you need to do a test, but essentially you can, if you already know that the user's loaded, so if you've done a load call and then you do get user, then you know that the user's loaded, and straight after that, so for example, if you had user equals new user object, for example, and you've said we're not doing it in this one method, we've said user load 1, for example. Now if we know that we've got it, then we essentially can say get user, and straight after that we've then got other properties that we can do. We can say get name, because we know that we've got the user loaded, okay, because we were explicit here by testing it, so we know that it's there. So all of the other properties are going to be there. So it means that, and also get name is just going to return a string. It kind of stops you from having variables all the time, but I just like having it done that way, because getting user, the whole point of it is that it actually returns the object, which essentially it returns itself anyway. You know, because it's a user object, it should have been loaded, so we're just saying get user. It's a little bit redundant, but hey. Return this name, okay, which means we need a name property, and set name, name equals name, should we say. Get surname, so we need another property here of surname. Null, return this surname. In this sense, we don't care whether they're set or not. And then this surname equals surname. Get username. Equals null, return username, and save. Okay, so this is for the time being just going to do return true. Okay, and what we're going to do here is throw new exception, and we're just going to say object save. Okay, so if it does get called, then we know that it's not implemented yet. Okay, So okay, that's that pretty much done now. So there's a couple of other properties like last updated, login and so on, but is it really that important for the user object right now? That's more the login side of it, so it's not totally important. So it means now potentially we've got a user object where we can start doing all sorts of things here. The model itself now needs to be created, so it's another little thing, but it means that we've got a way throughout the whole application website now where we can just say factory get active user. So if we don't have it, then boom, we've got it already. Okay, and once we've called this one once and we've done this one test after here, then we know that it's always set. Okay, but we need to do this one test in my eyes to check that it is actually an instance of a user object. Okay, so that's that pretty much done. The constructor itself, I'm not really concerned about a constructor for now, but as we did before, public function constructor, we want to know that this has got a private and user object model. Okay, and this is going to be a user model. Oops. That's what it's going to be. Okay, it's going to be, and we're going to need a method. So essentially, in here we need a method in the interface of public function sets user model, and in here we're going to be explicit as well, user model. So we're saying that it's got to have, did we call it a user object model? Yes, we did. User model, no? Okay, so we're saying that it's got to have a user model as an argument in here. Alright? Yeah, we're adding to things as we go along, but that's life. That's what you've got to do with top to bottom. You know, every now and again you go, oh, I've got to add this, and so on. Whereas bottom to top is you would have worked all this out completely before, but here we're just adding things as we go along, just because it saves time. Okay, sets the user model. That's it. That's all we're going to care about. So, within inside of the constructor. Yeah, this we would say then yeah, no, we would do that. We'd do that. We'd say sets user model equals new user model. Okay, which we haven't potentially created yet, but that's no problem. Okay, a user model doesn't need to know who we're talking about. Okay, it's just a user model, and it's just there as the kind of business logic between the actual class itself and the database or the files, or it's more the database. So we also need to set this one method in here, like so. This user object model equals model if we want to set it from outside. Okay. Okay, that's all of this bit done now. So I can't see. We've finished with the login model. Yeah, we're kind of, in a sense, if you're still actually watching this, in a sense we're bit by bit getting there to the point where stuff is actually working. I mean, we haven't tested it yet, but because we've built it in such a way, I can't see there being many problems. So we'll come here and we'll know that we've only got to test the login, and this is as far as we've got to go as such. And our main point of testing is that if get active user actually has a user ID, okay, we could just let this go and go to factory, for example, and go to here, and this would be this here would be the place where we would start testing, because if we've coded it correctly, then essentially this is the point here where the end result is, all right, of our login part. That's the success parts. Not here, sorry. This is failure of login object structure. Okay, something has majorly gone wrong here. Success of login objects. That's what we know that we've got here, that we've had success at this one point. If we know that we've got, or essentially actually we've got here as well, is that we know we've got success of login objects if this is being called. All right, because the only person really need to call this is then the login object itself. Okay. Right, I'm going to end this one video here, and then we're going to make the login model itself, and just keep continuing on from there and see what we've got. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.